It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one ghetto.
Greetings and welcome to Discussions with Indigenous Education, where we take live discussions on various topics that have to do with the Black and Indigenous communities and other peoples of color. I'd like to welcome our co host, Red Silver Fox, also known as Renee Sanders.
Greetings, everyone.
I'm your host, Travis Sanders, also known as Red Tail Hawk. And today's discussion is going to center around the topic of Black Indians. And so I know we could take that discussion and just go in so many different directions. But I want to start from the beginning, right? And so starting from the beginning for me, because I'm learning from you, let's talk about the humans. Let's talk about human activity in North America and then bring it all the way up to speed in today's world where, in a lot of different spaces, Black Indians are still a myth. And so let's talk about it. Maybe we could talk about why it's still a myth in some spaces and what we could do about it so that we can start to let the world know, hey, look, we here, right? And so human activity, moms, like, let's start with there.
Okay, well, most people know of how they have said that humans arrived in the Americas is across the Bering Strait or across Beringia. Um, and there are different dates, but most of the time it's about 15,000 years ago, where they say that humans started crossing that after the ice started melting and humans could now they had a way to walk across. They weren't walking on ice. Ground was beginning to be exposed. So again, that's 15,000 years ago. However, there are places east of the Mississippi where there are places that have artifacts that are older than 15,000 years. Um, and there's even one place all the way down down in Chile that has artifacts they're saying about to 19,000 years ago. In the United States, in Meadowcroft, Pennsylvania, they have artifacts that are dating like about 15, 16, I think 18,000 years ago. There are also artifacts that are in places in Virginia, places in Texas, all places that where humans could have arrived coming across the Atlantic currents.
Mhm.
Because we know that those Atlantic currents are very strong, and it's even written that you can get from Africa to the Americas with no navigational skill at all. You just get in one of those currents, and it'll bring you right over.
Well,
Uh,
before we get into the currents, let's talk about, well, I guess the currents matter with respects to you identifying that these artifacts that exist here in America's east of the Mississippi are a lot older than the Bering Strait theory. Just
it-
to wrap up what you were saying.
yes, yes,
Okay.
basically yes.
Okay. And so if they didn't take the Bering Strait here, then how did they get here? I guess would be a good question. But also the question is, which population would have been the population migrating here also? You have that Mongoloid population coming from Asia, because that's who was there. That's the population that inhabited that region in order to make that trip. And so, I guess as a part of that the transatlantic occurrence and that whole system, um, whom would ha- who would use those currents to get to America? And then, I guess that it would reference the conversation about why this has to do with Black Americans, right, and Black Indians.
Well, the continent of Africa is right there, which is where they would have caught those currents.
Hmm.
So, and again, that's where humanity started anyway. They started there in Africa and dispersed in all different directions. They did not just leave Africa and start traveling east. There were some that traveled west. Why would everyone go in the same direction? It's like, well, everybody's going this way. Maybe I'll go this way and see what's happening over in this direction.
Mhm.
So yeah, there was dispersal in all different directions in Africa. And so when you take that into consideration, then and again, humans had already had the knowledge of traveling across water. That was known with with
Previous,
pre
previous human species. Let's say it like
yes,
that.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So other human species before us, the Homo sapiens sapiens,
Before modern man, yes.
before modern man did use boats to travel. We know that as a fact.
Yes, yes. Well, we
Okay.
know that they were able to navigate water.
They were able to navigate water. Okay.
Well, they
And
had to.
so,
They crossed rivers. I mean, how did they get from Africa all the way over to Asia if they weren't crossing bodies of water? So,
right. Even into, I think even one species made it over to the islands, even right, the Philippines, and even into that area.
oh yes, oh yes.
Do you remember which hominoid species that was?
That was Homo floresiensis. That's
Homo.
the name
Okay.
of that. Yeah,
Okay.
that was the name of that species that they found on the islands. They say like little hobbit like people.
Okay. All right. And so now we're talking about something totally different. We're talking about not just modern man and the ability to navigate waters pre European colonization period, right? and
Okay.
and also other, not just not just this human species outside of Europe, right? Were able to use the waters, but also other human species was able to navigate the waters to cross and to reach other lands.
Yeah, so we're talking now. We're talking like millions of years ago. Now we're talking about when you're talking about those species.
Right. However, as of recently, when we're discussing the migration out of Central Africa into, well, as they begin to migrate and to, fill the different continents, at that same time that they were traveling east, do we start to see remnants of human activity here in North America?
Oh, okay. Well, dates, are changing as more and more studying is being done, and the timing of when humans started leaving out of Africa, they are finding that the dates are earlier and earlier. However, there are dates that they have found here in America. Is called the Topper site, which is in South Carolina. Um, and this site they have found three fossils. Uh, Two were burnt plant remains, and so they have not found skeletal remains, but they did find burnt plant remains, and they also found art tools also. And they believe that that site was a site where people would come and to obtain their tools and then take them back to wherever they were living. But again, these dates are 50,000 years ago and 51,000 years ago, right here in South Carolina.
Okay. All right.
And
So
of course, those dates are controversial as far as science is concerned. They've been they have found these things in the 1980s, in the 1990s, and they're still trying to dispute them, and they are not being successful with that.
right, because that changes the storyline of who was in the Americas and when the Americas began to start to become populated. which is
Even those artifacts that are found in Pennsylvania and Virginia that are dating to 15,000, 16,000, 14,000. If humans were just getting across the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago, how can we have artifacts that are 18,000 years ago east of the Mississippi River?
right.
And so we really need to and again they're starting to say that maybe there was another way that they came across. However, they're still not Africa is not included in that story, not yet.
Right. However, they will say, and before we go to break, they will say that the phenotype of these individuals look more like a Southern Asian than a Northern Asian, and so we can talk about that point a little bit more after the break. How about we do that so we can explain why that matters to the public?
Okay.
All right. And so let's take a small break. We'll be back with more discussions with Indigenous education.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education on PhillyCam. Greetings, and welcome to Indeed's Moments in Indigenous Education, which focuses on historical facts which have been omitted or forgotten. Please join us for today's topic. Today's topic: Indian slavery laws. Slavery in the Americas, especially in the United States, is a highly toxic subject in which history has not been very kind. Because of its toxicity, it is a subject that routinely gets circumvented. What is even more elusive is the topic of Indian slavery. But if one took a look at colonial laws, history cannot deny that Indians were used as slaves. As early as 1682, Virginia had a law that stated, quote, "All Indians which shall be sold by our neighboring Indians, or any other trafficking with us for slaves, are hereby adjudged, deemed, and taken to be slaves." End quote. Another 17th century Virginia law included Indians in the terminology Negroes and other slaves. In South Carolina, their slave code of 1740 stated that, quote, "All Negroes and Indians, mulattoes or mestizos, who now are or shall hereafter be in this province, and all their issue and offspring, born or to be born, shall be, and they are hereby declared to be, and remain forever hereafter, absolute slaves," meaning that all Negroes, Indians, and their children were slaves for their lifetime. The only exceptions to this law were mulattoes and mestizos who were already free, and Indians in amity with the government, or in other words, Indians whose tribe had a treaty with the government. The South Carolina Slave Code served as the model for other colonies in North America. In 1770, Georgia adopted the South Carolina Slave Code, and then Florida adopted the Georgia Code. All of the colony's early slave codes were basically congruent, which is clear evidence that Indians were used as slaves in all of the founding colonies. You have just finished watching Indeed's Moments in Indigenous History. Please join us next time. Peace. You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education on PhillyCam.
Greetings and welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education. Before the break, we talked to moms about the Northern versus Southern Asian with respects to the phenotype of indigenous populations that were existing in North America. They're starting to find bones in the Yucatan and other parts, other islands in the Caribbean islands, and then offshore too. So getting back to that, if you want to just give us a little bit of history, maybe people might be able to find an article and then why this matters to us.
Yes, well, it was a 2003 National Geographic article, and this article was discussing. Well, it was really an article saying that we may have to reevaluate how humans came over into the Americas. And one of the things that they found, and it is the oldest skull that they have found, and it has been found in the Yucatan. It was in a, well, it's around somewhere around a cave that is now totally underwater, but at that, when it wasn't always underwater at that place. And again, they found several skulls. One of them they named her Eva, and when they analyzed her, they said that her features were more of a Southern Asian as opposed to a Northern Asian. And the thing is that most people, when they hear the term Asian, it doesn't matter what part of Asia they're talking about, you get a particular image in your brain. And the image that you get is the mongoloid, someone from maybe Japan or China. You're Asian. However, uh, most people don't realize that Southern Asians, which would be people from some of those Polynesian islands, they are Negroid. So what the article was saying is that the features that they're finding on this oldest skull that they have found in the Americas has more Negroid features than they have Mongoloid features. So more Negroid features, more Black features than Asian features. However, by using that language, Northern Asian and Southern Asian, again, most people will not pick up on that language and will just, again, stay with the Asian image, the modern Asian image, and would just continue on and not give it any other thought.
Right, and this is important because again, now we have historical reference material that we can look at and say, hey, wait a second, this population that was existing in the Americas didn't it, may not was it definitely didn't only extend from the Bering Strait and that diaspora, but it also existed in other parts of the Americas with other populations. And again, that particular population being of a Negroid type, which would mean that population more than likely, came did a diaspora from the African region, and that again, these populations that are indigenous to the Americas didn't only come from that migration through the Bering Strait.
Yes, that's correct. Uh, and and again, they are still trying to figure out a way to to word that these are still people that are mongoloid coming from across the Bering Strait. Again, you see, I can't even twist it, but they'll be able to do it for you. You know,
Well, again, but that's the point of why we're discussing this, because again, it is a discussion. There's many reference materials that individuals will be able to go to verify, just this small conversation that we're having. But
okay.
again, the reality that these skulls that they are finding are Negroid, and that population was a Negroid population. But now, let's start to bring it up to some more relevant times, right? And of course, we're skipping thousands of years. I think we're going to go ahead and bypass the mound builders and just, as the collective, maybe we'll do a show on the mound builders another time so that they can have some more historical context to what was happening here in Americas. Sometimes during the evolution and the rise of different cities in Europe and other parts of the world, we had our own thing going on here in North America. Not, a lot of times they send us to South America in order to visit that Mesoamerican culture and to see artifacts and things. But we have them right here in the States. They're, we just need to be made aware of them, right? Why is this? Why is it important to know that there was a Negroid population in the Americas, prior to colonization, and where's the evidence and proof, right? And so, again, they're hiding their terms and they're using terms that would distract us from the main point. But, again, National Geographic's population was a Negroid population inhabiting this region. And so let's bring it up to a little bit more present time. We're talking about colonization. We're talking about, the establishment of and the discovery and the of the Americas. And I guess I could, I just wanted to start off with what was happening here when Columbus, De Soto, Ponce, what were their description of the population that they were encountering, and what were they doing with this population? I think it's important as we catch the audience up with why this is relative and why that story of the Black Indian was turned into a myth.
Well, when Columbus arrived here, uh, he immediately started talking about how, well, day three, he said that he would be able to take over the entire island with just 50 men, you know, um, and then maybe take them back to the king at his request. So and he was already a person who had been involved in enslaving Africans before his trip over here. He was a Portuguese trader, and that was going down into Africa, all the way down into what would now be modern day Ghana, and taking people back up into Mediterranean slave trade. So when he came over here, he was already familiar with Africans. Um, and so when he saw these people, that's why he was like, "Oh, you know what? There's islands of these people here that we could just utilize them." And so when he comes, when he leaves, when he comes back, when he goes back to Spain, he has to leave some of his men because one of his boats got destroyed. So then when he returns, the men are gone. He can't find them anywhere. He can't find the fort that was built for them to live in. They're nowhere to be found. So now, of course, these people are no longer friendly. Um, they have now been turned into Caribs. They have been turned into cannibals. And again, by utilizing these terminologies, it was then a way for Spain to justify enslaving the indigenous people. And so they started, and they started dividing them at that point, with the friendly ones and the Caribs. And they were friendly for as long as they were useful, and then once they were no longer useful, then they would get turned into Caribs.
Right.
And so, and then again, so again, this was a terminology that they were using. And writing back to the king, and the king is saying, okay, well, you know what, we're going to let you enslave these. We're going to let you enslave some Africans, and we'll let you enslave the Africans right there. And so when we read that in the history books, we are assuming that he is talking about bringing Africans from Africa. However, they was not talking about that. They were talking about the Africans that they were seeing on the islands and on the mainland of the dark-skinned indigenous people, and they were using them, bringing them into their islands, using them as slaves.
Yeah, and so of course, they look like Africans, so we'll call them Africans.
Yes.
And so, and again, that now we have a population that the European has encountered that is a Negroid population based on journals, writings, and historical reference materials.
Okay, but you know
Yeah.
what? We do need to make this reference though, that again, that they were only talking about uh, shipping Africans into the islands. So again, they're not making any specific saying about where these Africans are coming from. But
Mhm.
then when they want to start talking about the indigenous people, then they'll start using the term Indian, and they'll start using these other terminologies. And again, as they're writing in the books, because again, they're really trying to cover themselves with all the dirty mess that they're doing, changing the terminologies and changing the words that they're saying so that it will be pleasing the king.
But let's take a break, and when we get back, let's start to talk about that slave story, and then how the African that transatlantic slave story has been transposed on top of this pre-existing indigenous slave story, and how that really affects the dynamics and where the myth, where they decided to create this Black Indian myth and how that helps society.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so let's take a break. We'll be right back with more of Indigenous discussions with Indigenous education.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow.
We would like to thank our sponsors,